That family BBQ was supposed to be a happy day, a rare chance for everyone to gather, eat, talk, and soak in the warmth of being together. The backyard had been carefully decorated with string lights hanging overhead. The tables were covered with food, and the smell of grilled meat filled the air. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of children running around blended into what looked like a perfect picture of family harmony. My father stood in the middle of the yard, a half-finished can of beer still in his hand. His eyes moved slowly across each face before settling on me. His voice rang out, loud and clear enough to drown out the soft music playing in the background. Without hesitation, without even a hint of tact, he said the words that froze the entire atmosphere. "You know you were just an accident, right? I wanted a son." In that instant, every sound seemed to disappear. The laughter, the conversations, the scrape of cutlery against plates, all of it vanished. The whole family stared at me, as if waiting for a reaction. My aunt dropped the plate she was holding, food scattered across the ground, but no one bent down to pick it up. Some people turned away, unable to look directly at us. Others stood completely still, stunned into silence. I felt my chest tighten, yet my face remained strangely calm. Maybe, deep down, I had been preparing for this moment for a long time. His words no longer had the power to break me completely, but they still cut deep, reopening countless old wounds. In front of everyone, I refused to let myself cry. I took a slow, steady breath and lifted my head, looking straight into my father's eyes. Silence swallowed the backyard, heavy as a stone pressing against everyone's chest. In that moment, I knew whatever happened next wouldn't just ruin today's party, it would permanently overturn the balance of my entire family. Slowly, I rose to my feet as that suffocating quiet lingered in the air. The warm yellow lights cast shadows across each face, revealing shock, curiosity, even pity. But I no longer cared about their stares. The only person who mattered now was the man standing in front of me, my father. I looked straight into his eyes, my voice so calm that it surprised even me. "Funny," I said evenly. "Mom told me a very different story before she passed away." The change in his expression was immediate. The mocking smile on his lips stiffened. The hand holding the beer can began to tremble. I knew then that I had struck the one place he had tried to bury for years. Without giving him time to respond, I continued. "She also left me a letter. One she told me to open only when I truly needed it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope, lifting it into the air. Every pair of eyes instantly locked onto that small piece of paper, as if it held the weight of every secret our family had ever kept. The tension around us grew almost unbearable. I could feel my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. All I had to do was open the letter, and the truth hidden for years would come spilling out. The careless words my father had thrown at me just moments ago had now become the spark, the fuse to an emotional earthquake waiting to erupt. My father stammered and took a step forward as if to stop me, then froze. He understood that once I started reading, there would be no turning back. The entire family held their breath. No one dared to move. If you were standing in front of a truth that could overturn your entire life, would you choose silence or would you speak? Comment 1 if you believe the truth always deserves to be told. I took a deep breath and slowly opened the envelope under the watchful eyes of more than 30 relatives standing motionless around the table. The soft rustle of paper echoed through the stillness, loud enough to make my heart tremble with each beat. My mother's familiar handwriting appeared before me, gentle yet firm, as if she had written every word with the last of her strength. I began to read aloud. "My daughter, if you are reading this, it means you are finally strong enough to face the truth." With just that opening line, the atmosphere shifted. I could feel the shock, the confusion, the swelling emotion spreading quietly across the backyard. In the letter, my mother wrote that I was never an accident. On the contrary, she had waited years for me. She endured countless disappointments and heartbreaks for the chance to become a mother. She wrote about going to the hospital alone, about the nights she cried in silence, terrified she might never be able to have a child. And she said that I was the greatest gift life had ever given her, the most precious blessing she had ever known. Each sentence I read felt like a blade slicing through my father's cold, carefully constructed mask. The color drained from his face. His lips trembled, moving as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Around us, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others quietly wiped away tears. He would rather buy a boat than have a child. My voice did not shake as I continued. Mom wrote that he called me an accident because he was ashamed that he had once begged for the chance to become a father. The entire backyard fell into stunned silence when I reached the part where she revealed he had tried to defraud a bank by using a house that wasn't even legally his as collateral. This house was bought with my parents' money, I read clearly. His name has never been on it. It was never his house. A collective gasp moved through the guests like a wave. But the climax didn't stop there. In the final part of the letter, my mother revealed an even greater secret about the pain she endured throughout her marriage and the real reason she had quietly prepared everything for my future. I lifted my eyes and looked around at everyone, then finally back at my father. In that moment, I knew the truth about to be exposed wouldn't just shatter the image of a father. It would change the fate of this entire family forever. I continued reading, my mother's words ringing out in the suffocating silence. Each sentence landed like a hammer against the lies my father had buried for years. She wrote that even while I was still in her womb, she had carried every burden alone, physical and emotional. My father had not welcomed my existence. In fact, there were times he wanted to walk away entirely. She wrote about the years she lived in silence about swallowing her tears, just to preserve the illusion of a peaceful family. She said the most painful thing wasn't the harsh words thrown at her, but watching her daughter grow up feeling only half accepted, never fully wanted. That was why she had quietly prepared everything to protect me, even for a future where she would no longer be there. The backyard fell into a deathly stillness. Relatives began whispering, their gazes slowly shifting from me to my father, now filled with shock, doubt, and unmistakable disappointment. My father stood frozen, his face rigid, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned white. When I reached the final section, my voice trembled slightly. My mother revealed that she had left behind an important truth concerning the family assets, a secret that could completely change my father's position in this house. I paused for a moment, feeling dozens of eyes fixed on me. The air felt frozen. Everyone understood that if I kept reading, the fragile balance maintained for years would collapse. I lifted my head, looked straight at my father, and said slowly, "Mom didn't just leave me a letter, she left evidence." In that instant, I knew there would be no going back for anyone. I slowly opened the second envelope, the one my mother had instructed me to reveal only when the entire family was present. Inside was a stack of yellowed documents, neatly arranged, along with a small USB drive. My heart pounded as I realized these were not sentimental keepsakes. They were legal documents. I drew in a steady breath, forcing my voice to remain calm, and began to read. Line after line revealed a truth so powerful that the entire space seemed to stop breathing. Most of the assets my father had always claimed were the result of his life's hard work were, in fact, legally in my mother's name. Not only that, she had quietly drafted a will years ago, clearly stating that I was the sole legal heir. Those decisions were never driven by hatred or revenge. They came from fear, the fear that if she were gone, I would continue to be treated unfairly. The whispers quickly turned into chaos. Relatives began talking over one another. Some stood frozen in disbelief. Some looked skeptical. Others couldn't hide their panic. My father's face turned ghostly pale. He staggered back a few steps, his lips trembling as though he wanted to protest, but no sound came out. I plugged the USB into the projector that had already been set up. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of audio recordings, photos, and messages my mother had gathered over the years. They were undeniable. Recordings of cruel words, messages belittling her, evidence of plans to secretly manipulate assets behind her back. With each file that appeared, the respectable image my father had carefully maintained in everyone's eyes began to crack and then completely collapse. A heavy silence fell over the yard, broken only by uneven breathing. My heart ached sharply in my chest, yet at the same time, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in my life, I was no longer carrying silent humiliation on my shoulders. The truth hurt. I lifted my head, looked straight at my father, and said slowly, "I don't need a belated acknowledgement. What I need is fairness." In that moment, I knew every artificial bond that had tied us together for years had finally been severed. After the evidence was revealed, the room sank into a suffocating silence. No one seemed capable of speaking. Any attempt at justification now would have sounded hollow. My father dropped heavily into a chair, his aged face marked by unmistakable collapse. His eyes stared blankly into nothingness. For the first time in my life, he looked small, fragile. A few relatives quietly stood and left. The earlier commotion had dissolved into scattered footsteps. Each person carried away their own thoughts, their own emotions. But I knew one thing for certain: the image of the honorable, exemplary father they once believed in was no longer intact. I walked over and placed my mother's letter on the table in front of him. My voice was no longer tense. It held only exhaustion and calm. "I never wanted to dig up the past," I said, "and I never wanted to turn this gathering into a courtroom, but some truths, if left unspoken, become wounds that never heal." My father slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. They were filled with regret. He stammered out an apology, admitting that in his drinking and under the weight of life's pressures, he had poured all his disappointment onto me, treating me like an unwanted mistake. His words pierced like needles into my heart, but they also made something clear. His pain, whatever it was, could never justify the pain he had made me carry. I took a slow breath and replied softly, "I don't need a perfect apology. I just need to be respected." Then I turned and walked away, carrying with me a sense of lightness I had never known before. Behind me, I could hear muffled sobs, but this time, I was no longer held captive by the past. In the days that followed, my life shifted into an entirely different rhythm. There were no more heavy family dinners, no more judgmental stares, no more feeling like a stranger in my own home. I moved out and began building a space of my own, a place where I could breathe, cry, and laugh on my own terms. At first, it wasn't easy. Some nights I would wake from dreams with my heart pounding, old memories still clinging tightly to me. But instead of running, I learned to face them. I started journaling. I attended therapy sessions. I slowly allowed myself to be vulnerable. And in that honesty, I began healing little by little. I poured my energy into my work, focusing on goals I had once set aside. Every small success gave me more confidence, more momentum. I came to understand that my worth was never defined by how I was born, but by how I chose to live and shape my future. At the same time, I opened myself to new relationships. New friends and sincere colleagues gradually filled the empty spaces my family had left behind. They didn't pry into my past. They simply stayed listening, supporting, showing up. Through them, I learned how to trust again. And slowly, I learned how to love again, too. One afternoon, as I sat alone watching the sunset spill across the city, I found myself smiling. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuine peace. I realized I was no longer the child desperate for validation. I had become independent, strong enough to create my own happiness. In that quiet moment, I silently thanked my mother. Her quiet sacrifices had given me the chance to live a fuller life, freer, more honest, more my own. Sometime later, my father called me. His voice sounded hoarse, slower than before. He said he had spent many sleepless nights thinking, and had finally realized that what he had lost was not only his pride, but also the daughter who had longed for his love for so many years. I listened in silence. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to forgive. We agreed to meet at a small, quiet cafe. He arrived early and waited for me, looking worn and tense, his hands tightly clasped together. When he saw me, he quickly stood up. His eyes held both hope and fear. In that moment, I noticed something I had never seen before. The man standing in front of me was no longer the powerful figure from my childhood. He was simply an aging father, afraid of losing his last chance. He asked me to give him time to make amends, to repair the damage he had caused. He didn't justify himself. He didn't shift the blame. He only admitted his mistakes and expressed regret. His words touched the softest part of my heart, but they also made me cautious. I understood that forgiveness cannot be rushed, and trust, once broken, must be rebuilt from the very beginning. I told him I was willing to give us both a chance not to return to the past, but to move forward in a healthier way. We didn't need to become a perfect family. We just needed to learn how to respect each other and truly listen. When I left the cafe, the sky was clear after the rain. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. My heart felt light, not because everything had been resolved, but because I was finally mature enough to face it all with clarity and compassion. As time passed, I gradually built a life that felt more stable and grounded. My career progressed steadily. My relationships became healthier. Most importantly, I learned how to love myself. The old wounds didn't disappear completely, but they no longer controlled my emotions or my choices. They became lessons, reminders to cherish the present and live more consciously each day. My relationship with my father slowly shifted in a positive direction as well. We met occasionally, talking more about the present than the past. He learned how to listen. I learned how to share. There were no more accusations or blame, only patience and effort from both sides. I understood that reconciliation is a long journey, one that requires time and sincerity. There were still moments when thinking about my mother made my chest ache, but instead of drowning in sorrow, I chose to live the way she would have wanted me to: strong, kind, and free. I began volunteering, supporting young people who had experienced wounds similar to mine. Every story shared, every hand held, reminded me that life, even after heartbreak, can still be deeply meaningful. One morning, standing in front of the mirror, I smiled at myself. I no longer saw a lost child. I saw a confident adult. I felt grateful for my past, even though it had once been painful because it had shaped the person I am today. And if there is one message I want to send to anyone carrying hidden wounds, it is this: you are not defined by the circumstances of your birth. You are defined by how you rise, how you move forward, and how you create the life you deserve. Some nights, when the city has fallen asleep, I sit alone by the window, quietly watching the distant lights and letting my thoughts drift back to the past. The memories that once cut deeply no longer feel as sharp, but they are still strong enough to remind me how long a journey I have traveled. I've come to understand that healing is not about forgetting. It's about learning to accept and live peacefully with what has happened. I've trained myself to pause and listen whenever my heart feels heavy. Instead of forcing myself to be strong all the time, I allow myself to be vulnerable. I allow myself to feel sadness. I allow myself to need comfort. That honesty with my emotions has helped me regain the balance I didn't even realize I had lost. I've also learned to be grateful for the people who entered my life at the right time. They didn't offer empty advice. They simply stayed listening, accepting me fully as I am. Through them, I discovered that family is not built by blood alone, but by empathy and sincere love. Gradually, I stopped blaming my father, not because I had forgotten the pain, but because I refused to let it continue controlling my life. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it frees you from the weight of resentment. And in that moment of letting go, I felt lighter, freer. I believe everyone carries a story within them. It may be painful, it may be dark, but it also holds the potential for transformation. As long as we are brave enough to face it, patient enough to endure it, and compassionate enough to love ourselves through it, even the deepest wounds will one day close, leaving behind someone stronger and more grounded. After everything that happened, I began seeing life through a different lens. I no longer rushed to meet other people's expectations, nor did I try to prove my worth through external validation. Instead, I focused on building a balanced life, one where my mind, emotions, and spirit were nurtured equally. Each morning, I carved out time for small but meaningful rituals: a warm cup of tea, a few pages of a book, a slow walk under the open sky. Those simple moments helped me reconnect with myself, to listen to my inner rhythm and appreciate the present. I've learned that happiness doesn't live in grand achievements. It hides in ordinary, quiet peace. I also began expanding my circle in a more positive direction. I joined community projects where strangers shared the same desire to spread kindness and hope. Every story I listened to, every hand I held, reminded me that pain is not unique to any one person. But when we share it, pain transforms into strength, and loneliness turns into connection. Little by little, I learned to believe in the future without fear. I allowed myself to dream again, to set new goals